ability to be imperialists and colonizers. But, you know, the emergence of the US as a world superpower after World War II helped them to really like start going on the offensive, enacting a, you know, kind of brutal, bloodthirsty foreign policy that, to me, has caused like far more suffering than almost any regime in history. I wrote any regime in history, but I'll just say almost, but probably. So yeah, sort of like back then, rather than the, you know, menace of global Islam or radical Islam or like the millions of permutations of those, you know, we had the menace of world communism, which again extended to any non-right-wing regime with any thoughts of establishing a modicum of self-determination. To pick just one example, you know, Patrice Lumumba, you can Google him. And, you know, so this rhetoric kind of lapped up with enthusiasm by most of the American public, as the anti-terror rhetoric is today, provided ideological justification for brutal military interventions into 71 different countries from 1945 to 1991. And so, like, most people, even like I, as a public school person, somehow learned about like McCarthyism and the Red Scares. So I'm kind of putting those as background that I hope we kind of know, but maybe I think fewer people, myself included until I started studying it, know how much brutality this, the ideology behind those also led us to inflict onto the rest of the world, especially in the early 1950s when McCarthyism was at its apogee. So yeah, I just picked a couple dates that I think are telling of the continuity between, you know, anti-communism and Islamophobia. So in June 1954, a year after the US had murdered 2 million people in Korea, and the CIA had overthrown the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and less than a month after the CIA had overthrown the democratically elected President of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz, which we'll return to, the McCarthy era came to a close with the conclusion of the Army McCarthy hearings, which kind of revealed that, you know, he was really hamming up the sort of menace of communism in the US. So, you know, this was sort of one of these weird times where some chunk of like mainstream Americans finally became suspicious of anti-communist propaganda. You know, so the ruling class felt maybe we need to reel in, you know, the US's destruction of vibrant third world democratic regimes for a little bit until this, you know, public suspicion blew over. You know, but they couldn't go a month, you know, without unleashing atrocities on some impoverished population somewhere. So they started, you know, they said, okay, well, if we can't go over there, what if we convince people that if we don't keep bombing everyone out there, then, you know, evil people start to come and infiltrate our communities in here. So as troops returned from Korea to find that we were in the 9th month of an economic recession, the hunt for scapegoats took on a new urgency. And so what did we do? That exact same month, the Immigration and Naturalization Service launched what was officially called, and I'm only going to say it once because it's literally an ethnic slur, but it was the official name of the operation in the US government across all documents. It's literally called Operation Wetback. That was the name of the operation in 1954, which led to the deportation of 1,074,277 Mexicans in its first year alone, nearly half of whom were US citizens who just had quote-unquote Mexican descent, which is just anyone who was living in like half of Mexico when we took it. So, you know, that's sort of telling to me, like that link between, oh, we can't do anything abroad, or oh, people are critical of our actions abroad, and like turning back in to say, oh, but yo, it's not out there, the evil's here too. But shortly thereafter, the, you know, public suspicion resided, and the Vietnam War started, so everyone was back in full, you know, cheerleading mode, and the CIA gleefully resumed its bloodletting. To choose another intervention from a hat, they aided the overthrow of Sukarno in Indonesia in 1965, providing massive lists of, quote, known or suspected communists, you know, kind of like known and suspected terror supporter, you know, the words that we have today, to the new military regime who dutifully and efficiently carried out a massacre of 1 to 3 million of these, quote, communists or alleged communists over the next 2 years. But then it's like the lessons from that racial slur operation were applied in an even more direct and brazen manner a year later in Guatemala, where the literal man, it was a man obviously, who led that operation was now a US State Department employee who planned and led, quote, Operation Cleanup, a massive assassination campaign which included the methodical capture, torture, and killing of over 30 union organizers in a single 4-day span. So this is all that year, 1966. He finishes the sort of Mexican deportation campaign sort of officially ends in 1963. And by 1966, he's already set up in Guatemala, you know, kind of transferring the lessons. And then it's interesting because then if you like read the literature on it, where did those, like, the death squads who actually did that, where were they trained? Turns out they were almost all trained at a Border Patrol Academy in Los Fresnos, Texas in 1965. So it's just like, you know, they're going back and forth. Reminded me a lot of like how the US police departments, you know, train with the IDF today. Yeah, so fast forward 20 years, the Soviet Union's on the ropes in Afghanistan, right? Having spent the past 8 years fighting the US-funded and armed Mujahideen, rough precursors of the Taliban, which we could argue about, but yeah. One of the hundreds of paramilitary groups that Reagan would shower with money solely on the basis of their anti-communism, no other questions asked, as we fund a lot of groups solely on the basis of fighting radical Islam today. A fun example, well not actually fun, but is the Contra death squads in Nicaragua, who Reagan called, quote, the moral equivalent of this country's founding fathers in 1985. And another controversial thing which we could talk about is you know, the puppet regime in Israel had its own mujahideen at almost the exact same time, which it embraced, funded, and supplied in its war against the secular PLO, namely Hamas, right? So there's a Wall Street Journal article called like, How Israel Spawned Hamas, you know, the radical Wall Street Journal, and it's, you know, anti-Semitic stuff. Anyway, so as secular nationalist group after secular nationalist group fell to these death squads of various ideological stripes, I think I kind of view it as like the US started to plan which marginalized and oppressed groups we'd go after next. And there's this amazing, I mean, terrifying, like I keep using these words, they're not used in a positive way, amazing in a horrific way, example where in 1987, after there were sort of these 4 Palestinians actually I think they were arrested in like California without charge, and it was like this kind of scandal. I wish I knew more about that. I didn't get to read about that. But that's what sparked it, because then some rogue government employee leaked these documents revealing the Reagan administration's plan to round up and deport immigrants en masse from 8 countries that will sound extremely familiar to us today: Libya, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Tunisia, Algeria, Jordan, and Morocco. The memo, like you can go and find it, it went into excruciating detail about, this is from the article, quote, a procedure to detain and intern thousands of aliens while they awaited what would presumably become a mass deportation, including a vivid image of a massive detainment facility, 100 outdoor acres in the backwoods of Louisiana, replete with specifications for tents and fencing materials, cot measurements, and plumbing requirements. So who authored that memo? Well, you guessed it, the same people who I was talking about before, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. So, you know, in an international mirror of the domestic situation in the 1950s, they now said, oh, Americans are a little suspicious now of what we're doing out there, because for people who know or remember, it was right after Reagan had dispatched Marines to Lebanon. Like right after Sabra and Shatila, we were like, oh my gosh, we should help the people who did that. And so we sent Marines, which quickly provoked a car bomb attack, killing 241 of them, and they quickly withdrew the Marines. So the US, it was like, oh, what are we doing? Why are we sending Marines there? Why are they dying? This kind of suspicion, right? So to me, it's another example where they turned back inwards and said, look, you got to support these because look, all these scary Libyans. And then just to like finish up, like incidentally, the attack, that car bomb attack, was carried out by a group which then called themselves Islamic Jihad. There's a bunch of groups that call themselves that, but the Lebanese Islamic Jihad, which, a good chunk of which formed a group 2 years later called, the Army of God, Hezbollah. And as the Cold War came to an end, and more groups like these developed the audacity to start pushing back against US, Israeli, Saudi atrocities, the ruling class didn't even see any need to reinvent the wheel. They just dredged up the strategies they'd used over the past 50 years. They Control-F replaced communists with radical Islamists, and they headed back out to war. I'm skipping some stuff, but there's a comic I wish I could show because it's from this new ad that the South African apartheid regime took out in a newspaper in the 80s, and it's titled Soviet Encirclement of South Africa, and it has this picture of a grizzly bear with a hammer and sickle in its head, and there's a bunch of, and it's like, chomping on innocent South Africans, and the speech bubble says, "Yes, we shall drive South Africa into the sea," which is a familiar sentiment from, they're going to drive. So they didn't even change the words. They just Control-F replaced. So the point of all this is just to say, when we observe these sudden rises in domestic xenophobia, like the staggering rise of violent Islamophobic rhetoric and attacks that we see today, I think it's important to, also look outwards at the horrors that the US empire is unleashing on the rest of the world and kind of ask how these are, sort of like mutually reinforcing each other in a loop. And I just wanted to end on a quote. I'm skipping so much, this is good. I wanted to end with a quote from Ward Churchill because, to prepare for this, I was also thinking about, academics with the bravery to, speak out against all these atrocities and this repression, like Professor Abdulhadi, but Ward Churchill was, purged from his position at UC Boulder for doing so. Professor Abdulhadi is kind of a survivor of these, concerted attacks time and time again. So I just wanted to bring the words of Ward Churchill now that he sort of can't necessarily speak at any university, basically. It's in an essay where he's sort of synthesizing this book, German Guilt by Karl Jaspers, about, everyone says oh my gosh, the Holocaust, let's never repeat that again, let's learn the lessons. And Jaspers was like, okay, well, what would that really look like? Let's kind of draw out the conclusions. Anyway, so that's the context. And I just think that this quote is sort of my mantra when I'm thinking about this stuff, which is, it is the collective responsibility of the citizens in a modern state to ensure, by all means necessary, that its government adheres to the rule of law, not just domestically, but internationally. There are no bystanders. No one is entitled to an apolitical exemption from such obligation. Where default occurs, either by citizen endorsement of official criminality, or by the failure of citizens to effectively oppose it, liability is incurred by all. Although degrees of onus may be assigned along a continuum traversing the distance from those who most actively embrace that, none are innocent. That was the sentiment actually of the US Supreme Court justices who carried out the Nuremberg trials, which is kind of mind-blowing. The US was the one saying this in the 40s and 50s, and I think it's ironic that we can just bring that back up today and point it at.
Is a senior at NYU's Gallatin School of Individualized Study, concentrating in political philosophy and comparative history. On NYU to implement a socially responsible investment policy. Jenny has lived in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, where she volunteered in the West Bank in various capacities and worked for an Israeli human rights lawyer. Please help me in welcoming Jenny.
Thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be here. So, as you heard, I am a student at a school downtown called NYU. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that context. So when I started there in 2015, there was already a really rich environment for supporting Palestine on campus. Amazing work. So I was really proud to join that tradition and add to it by joining other students in forming our chapter of the Jewish Voice for Peace. We were quickly introduced to the institutional biases against Palestine. Originally, we figured we would go through the Center for Jewish Student Life in order to gain club status, since we were a Jewish club. But faculty members demanded we abandon our position on the boycott. We refused, and months of back and forth ensued, eventually forcing us to give up our plan on joining the rest of the institutional Jewish community and registering through the university at large. Nonetheless, we gained official club status, and within a couple months, all 6 of our founding members were added to the shady blacklist, Canary Mission. So we started our chapter of the Jewish Voice for Peace because there was a clear need for it. More and more Jewish students on campus are looking for communities to celebrate their culture and religion free from Zionism. Still, accusations of NYU's campus becoming anti-Semitic only intensified. If you ask me, this is clearly because while Jewish community was flourishing in part because of our club, the Zionist control of the discourse on campus around Israel and Palestine had been weakened. Pro-Israel clubs on campus still claim to speak on behalf of all Jewish students, but their claims are far less convincing. The 2018 to 2019 school year was an incredible time for Palestine on our campus. We passed a BDS resolution through the Student Senate. The Department for Social and Cultural Analysis took a pledge of non-cooperation with NYU's Study Away program in Tel Aviv. This is essential as NYU continues to support an academic program which is not accessible to countless students. These achievements could not have been possible with just the work and efforts of SJP and JVP alone. We were able to pass BDS because we had the pledged support of over 50 diverse student groups, ranging from the Black and Brown Coalition to NYU Divest for Climate Justice, to the Asian American Women's Alliance, just to name a few. These groups saw their struggles as interconnected with the struggle for a free Palestine. If we continue to foster these coalitions and build networks of solidarity, we may face barriers along the way, but we're ultimately unstoppable. And the only other thing that I want to say, which our friend Riham mentioned a couple weeks ago when we were giving another talk, is that we've been pushing the boycott, divest element of BDS, and it's been successful. We've gotten so many great, we've moved so many mountains along the way, and it's time that we start talking about the sanction element. So I'm excited to keep talking about that with everybody here.
Nadia Ben Yusuf is the Advocacy Director at the Center for Constitutional Rights. She directs all advocacy around issues related to the promotion of civil and human rights. Her work often centers at the immigrant policy on Palestine-Israel. Nadia is a member of the New York State Bar and holds a BA in Sociology from Princeton University and a JD from Boston College Law School. In 2018, Nadia received the National Lawyers Guild Rob Doyle Lawyer Award for commitment to social and political justice.
Woo!
Thanks, Abdulhadi. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Russ, for organizing. Actually, if we could just give a shout out and a clap to Russ. This work is possible and is so inspiring because of you, because of our elders in this struggle, who did to a world that we have not yet seen, but we know is possible. And your leadership and commitment to us is why we're all here, and we're grateful for you and excited to learn from you and excited to also cultivate and curate more intergenerational conversations. I think what you said, Jeff, and I took like a note, I want to talk to you forever.
I have links.
Great, we need links, we need citations, but it's looking back into our past, right? I think the history is our future. We're living this history, and I think that the less we engage with our past, it's to our own peril, right? So I'm grateful for historians, and I'm grateful for your work and for sharing that. And I also just wanted to thank all the student organizers in the room. So as much as we are rooted in the legacy of struggle of our elders, it is you all who are on the front lines, who are giving us the Fordham Justice Wins speaker series. Fordham University, SJP, is organized, is active now, and is tonight having a Justice Wins speaker series, and Maria LaHood is speaking about her work to ensure that SJP could organize. and could have a presence on campus, and they are organizing and they are winning and we are winning. And I just want to say that because as we know, the situation on the ground is devastating. What's happening in Palestine, what's happening in our communities around the world is horrifying, as you were saying, both historically but present day. Authoritarianism around the world, this sort of proto-fascist world that we're living in here but elsewhere. The situation is terrible, and yet the movement is winning. And I hope that at the end of this we feel we're going to be talking about terrible things that are happening to our colleagues and our comrades, but we're winning. When we organize, we win. So the Center for Constitutional Rights is a legal and advocacy organization that has been working together with social movements since the 1960s. And you were mentioning kind of all of these interventions around the world. CCR has sued the US government for every foreign war since Vietnam, has been on the side of racial justice organizing, has been standing with Puerto Rican freedom fighters. And in that spirit, because our first case was representing Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Delegation, we believe in human rights. That's why in the 1990s we were working together with Palestinian human rights organizations to take a case around the Alien Tort Statute, really leading this sort of ATS litigation in the United States against the Pennsylvania manufacturer of the tear gas canister. So this is in 1990. Labs. And then we represented Rachel Corey's family against Caterpillar. Because of our history and our commitment to racial justice and social change and social transformation, we have always been standing with and inspired by the Palestinian struggle for freedom, and that continues today. And I think as our work has transformed a bit as lawyers and as movement lawyers because of how we respond to the needs of students and of our community here in the United States. So more recently, our work has transformed domestically to be in service of student organizers, faculty, community organizations who are facing a huge amount of repression for their work on Palestine. So as the movement grows, as you know, as movements for justice grow, what happens? Way more repression, right? When you become powerful, they try to find ways to silence you. And we have kind of been together with our comrades and colleagues on the front lines of what that has meant in the past few years. So there's all sorts of mechanisms of repression that you'll hear about and that we've touched on a little bit today. The canceling of events, putting bureaucratic barriers in place, so you can't have non-Columbia students coming, you have to have a security force, and it's going to cost you $10,000 to a student group, various threats to academic freedom, criminal investigations into activists and organizers. There's all sorts of other suppression and tactics that we know of, that we've seen throughout history, certainly. And what CCR and what I can focus on a little bit now, just so that we have a background and we get the scope of the issue, are anti-BDS legislation, just so that I think we all are familiar, but just to give you brief numbers and any updates. I think folks have shared a little bit around the redefinition of anti-Semitism, so maybe not to speak so much about that and allow you to kind of think through that together as a community and what that means. There's really interesting advocacy efforts happening around HR 4009, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act going through Congress, passing through Congress, and then lawsuits. So just to give, I think we'll start just very briefly so that we know where we are. Since 2015, 27 states have passed anti-BDS legislation, including 5 executive orders by governors. So it's sweeping. But what do we know about this anti-BDS legislation? Is it constitutional? No. No. Is it a clear violation of the First Amendment? Yes. Are courts finding that? Yes. So in Kansas, in Arizona, when it's come up, And when the court and legislators have been asked to defend themselves, they're pulling out of those cases, right? Because they know that we have a rich legal jurisprudence around boycott. So the NAACP versus Claiborne, a Supreme Court decision that found very clearly that when Black organizers were boycotting white businesses, boycotts are expressive, and when you're trying to change an economic or a political or social situation, of course it's protected by the First Amendment. Boycotts are protected. So this is a losing game. It's a losing game, but it's a tactic, right? It's a tactic to tire us out. It's a tactic to distract us. It's a tactic to put tons of resources into challenging this sort of legislation. We have an organization, incredible organization, you mentioned it, founded by Dima Khaledi, Palestine Legal, which was incubated at CCR. So CCR, Michael Ratner, and our Palestine team was really committed to making this happen and recognizing that there was a need. And so Palestine Legal has a great website called The Right to Boycott if you want to learn more about that. Together with the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, JVP I think is also a partner of that. So just keep track. In the back, so we'll talk about, you have in the back I just brought 10 of these copies of the Palestine Exception to Free Speech. But now it's an old report, and I'll just tell you secretly that the new, although it's live streamed, but the new report is coming out in next summer, so you'll see kind of an updated version of that. So these are attempts to regulate expressive speech, and they're failing. They're failing, but they're effective, right? We know that it's effective strategies, and so again with the lawsuits, these are long cases. So on Tuesday, Maria was actually in Washington because she has for the last 8 years been representing the Olympia Co-op. You were familiar with this a bit. So the Olympia Co-op was sued for engaging in a boycott. So this is like they're vanguards, right? So this is a decade ago. They're thinking about boycott and they're responding to the 2005 call, and they start boycotting Israeli goods. Sued, and on Tuesday, Maria, 8 years later, is in court fighting this because we win in 2010 and they appeal and then we keep going, and so it's a long battle, but this is movement lawyering at its best. We're in it, we're gonna win it, and this is exhausting, but what to do? So she was just there, and we are standing with the co-op board and their decision and recognizing that this is what's called a SLAP case. Are we familiar with SLAP, S-L-A-P-P?
No.
No, so it's strategic lawsuits against public participation. So these are lawsuits, civil litigation, it's often filed by corporations, big entities that are, and these SLAP statutes or SLAP lawsuits are agreed, and the ASA in a really historic moment said we're going to boycott and we're going to answer the Palestinian call for freedom, justice, and equality, and we are going to boycott Israeli academic institutions. Great. So the Brandeis Center and 4 members of the ASA were like, we're going to sue you. To the ASA and 10 individuals, including Steven Salaita, who's our client, and I know that your lawyer is also representing defendants, of course, and saying, we are, again, in the same concept, trying to dismiss these lawsuits, saying that they're SLAP, they're violating anti-SLAP lawsuits. So this is filed in brilliant, brave, public intellectual who has changed the game. And we are a threat when we are loud, and we are a threat when we believe and know that the world that we are fighting for is beautiful and is ours to have, and so we are a threat, and so they try to shut us down, like they did with Steven Salaita. This was dismissed, the plaintiffs have appealed, we keep winning, right? But people keep appealing, and so we remain on the front lines. And I just want to end by shifting and pivoting us a bit to how we win, and a recognition that what is happening to Palestine, to Palestinians, to allies and accomplices and comrades in the struggle for Palestinian freedom is happening to social movements across the country and around the world. Palestine, and the academics in the room can finally tell me how to say this word, harbinger? Harbinger? Who knows? I always see it written and I'm like, what is this word?
Now I know.
Palestine is that, right? Palestine, the tactics of repression that are being used against Palestine, against students now, or have been used against students, are being used against climate justice activists, are being used against indigenous activists, and I just want to point us to another SLAP statute, or SLAP case that we're involved in, and one, again, we win. We win. When we fight and when we organize, we win because we are on the right side. And justice prevails. And I'm an eternal optimist because because you have to be. But I do believe that. So after Standing Rock, Energy Transfer Partners, who's behind them they sued them under a RICO statute. RICO is about silence. And so they filed a RICO lawsuit. Who can say what that is and why that's important? Because my children are getting harassed at school and I don't want to be a part of this. And I say that because, again, in terms of the strategy and how we win because we are the multitude. We win when we look up and we recognize that our struggles are interconnected and linked, and that what is happening to you matters because what happens to you is also happening to me. In that our capacity, ability to flourish and to be free depends on each other. My liberation is bound up in yours. This is Lila Watson, the great Aboriginal activist, and she says it's actually not me, it's our collective that says, right? That this, if you are here and we're struggling because you know that you are bound up, if you're not able to understand that you are either, you haven't worked through, or your community hasn't worked through issues of racism, of homophobia, of the pieces of us that are broken, haven't dealt with our own shit, then that's a problem, right? And the alternative is when you deal with it, when you build relationships and you build trust and you organize together, then they can't shut you down. They can't shut you down, actually. So one of the best events that I saw at BU a number of years ago, the UJMA, the Black Student Union, with the SJP, organized a panel on political prisoners and incarceration. It's not just happening in Palestine. It's not just, the analysis actually is really strong in Palestine, that they're all political prisoners. Every prisoner is a political prisoner, amen. But they said, let's talk about it together. This SJP had 25 people come to their events for the whole year. The UJMA had similar, 50, 100 people. They did this event together. Suddenly, overflowing crowd. 500 people in the auditorium, and then a separate satellite view for people who couldn't get in. And everyone was crying at the end. All the student organizers were crying at the end, and everyone was, people that were sitting next to me would be like, I knew nothing about Palestine, but I came because I care about prisons. And now, oh my God, this is about Palestine, and it's about Puerto Rico, and it's about poverty, and it's about, we have to do that work. We have to do that work, and that is how we win, and I'll end, and thank you so much.
Yeah, we're going to do a short, 5-minute Q&A before Professor Abdulhadi speaks, if anybody has any questions for the first speakers. Yeah.
Not a question, but I'd like to make a pitch.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Steve Spaticelli. I'm memorable anyway. Launch good, and then Rabab Abdulhadi. If you signed on, oh, it is up here. Great, this is it. And if you bought an Evite ticket for the event today, we'll be sending you a follow-up email with this information. But if you really want to encourage you to spread the word. Thanks.
What that means when we have met talking about raising money, how it impacts on people, because basically it's a chill effect.
That's right.
It's really a chill effect. It has no legal standing, but it has a chill effect. So when we met, for example, in Southern California, with a certain supporter who has businesses and wanted to support her, the question for him came up, how would it affect his business? Because much of his business is connected to the state. In other words, he does work as a contractor. And so he wants to support the case, but he also had to take into mind, how would this impact if they are able to impose that outlawing BDS? How would it affect his business? This is the kind of chill effect that affects us from the point of view of supporters who would help us financially. And we need a lot of money to not only her case, but in general, we've always had this problem as a political movement. But now, these laws really, you can see it impacts in ways that we don't even realize.
Is that okay? Okay, thanks. Thank you all so much. This was really wonderful. I really appreciated also kind of talking about ways to be thinking very useful. I wanted to ask if that is the case, how do we also think about Palestinian solidarity pushing beyond sometimes BDS as one of the only tactics of Palestine solidarity in ways that can be connecting both with movements in the present, but then also drawing examples historically, because one of the issues that consistently happens with student organizing is that after passing like resolutions, right, for divestment, a lot of organizers are like, okay, now what, right? So my question is, after that moment, right, what's the now what that y'all see, and what are the ways in which that can be building cross-movement solidarity?
That's a great question. Can we hold the answers till the end? Because it's so perfect. What's your name?
Gabrielle.
Gabrielle. Wonderful. Okay, it's my honor and my pleasure to be the one to introduce our guest of honor. Linda, you're supposed to be up here. I saved this for you. Oh, well. We are honored to have Linda Sarsour with us, our sister. We just want to pay homage to Linda for her leadership. So, I don't know where to start with Rabab, so I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. I love Rabab as a sister, as a student, as a teacher, as my friend, my heart. So I can't do this very dispassionately, but I do want to say, following on Nadia, talking about transnational solidarity, de-exceptionalizing Palestine, the indivisibility of justice is the hallmark of my dear friend, Rabab Abdulhadi. She struggled, right? And I said, we want to be part of that too. So we joined together, and then we said, well, you have to meet, so you'll use our conference room and meet with us, you know, at our place. So solidarity with Palestinians was always in, you know, something that Rabab and I kind of did together. We lived together. Rabab was the greatest student. I had Rabab and Riham Barghouti, in the same class. Suhair Hamad. It was unbelievable. Can you imagine? They taught me. She could have gotten up and taught any class. She was extraordinary. So Rabab graduated summa cum laude from Hunter College. She went on with full funding to go to Yale University in sociology. She got her master's degrees, 2 of them, and a PhD in sociology from Yale. She went and taught at American University in Cairo. She taught at NYU, where she was a fellow. She taught, I'm just remembering these things. She was, she taught at the University of Michigan in Dearborn, where she was also the director of the. But for Rabab, activism and scholarship are inseparable. And I want to really emphasize that Rabab the scholar, Rabab Abdulhadi, the scholar and the thinker, needs to be better known and celebrated. Yeah. I mean, I knew from when I first met you, the intellectual capacity of this woman is endless. It's extraordinary. And her work as a teacher is amazing. I saw it because I'm not in California. I saw it in my classroom when she really stood up and taught the class. But I also, for the intellectual quality and the syncretism of all of these amazing thinkers from the Middle East, but from South Africa, from the US, from Europe, France, every place. And also watching Rabab mentor her students, the graduate students. Really, I mean, I've been in the academy for what, 45 years or whatever. This is a real teacher who loves her students, who is devoted. They are so lucky. Oh, I didn't go into the publication, so this was the thing. You go online, you will be, no, I mean, I know her, right? Did I know? How does she, under attack, produce dozens of articles? I mean, so much. And the award-winning book, Arab and American Feminisms, that book in which she was the lead editor, won the 2012 National Arab American Book Award. She has, I would say, in her scholarship, the intersectionality of all the movements is all there. I actually think, you know, that if you're interested in Black Palestinian solidarity, the most important thing you can read is Framing Resistance, Call and Response, reading Assata Shakur's Black Revolutionary Radicalism in Palestine. It's fabulous.
So could you say it again?
Yes.
Write it down, sorry.
It's called Framing Resistance, Call and Response, reading Assata Shakur's Black Revolutionary Radicalism in Palestine.
Wow.
Rabab's fluency on this connection and on anti-racism as endemic to the Palestinian struggle will be honored when she does a keynote at university in Melbourne of a big international conference next week, right? I mean, in 2 weeks. Oh my God, go home and rest. Don't even. A international conference on Black Palestinian solidarity. This activism scholarship symbiosis also comes out in Rabab's work in professional organizations. Some of us were at the National Women's Studies Association. Sherry was back there, and some of you, maybe others of you. Yeah.
Dina.
What?
Dina was.
Yeah, Dina. So we worked for 3 different years, but under the leadership of Rabab Abdulhadi, we actually got NWSA to pass a BDS resolution. It was really remarkable. And the prominence of her voice is also present in the Middle East Studies Association, the American Studies Association, and across so many boundaries. I want to echo Nadia's point that we're winning. I'm an optimist too. I believe in the glass half full, and somebody told me yesterday the glass 2/3 full. Things are turning. Our Dear Rabab is being presented, has been this month, with 2 awards. The American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee presented her with their Alex Odette Memorial Award already, right? Earlier this month. And tomorrow, she will receive the, what do they call, the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization will present Rabab with their Lucius Walker Community Organizing Award at their awards program tomorrow in New York City. And I just mentioned one more thing, and this is just something that I thought was really fabulous. At Rabab's own universities of California State Universities.
Salud, I want to thank Raz, everybody here, everybody who's organized. There's so many people here in the room. that I've known very dearly, that who are very close to me, and if I start talking about every single one person, I probably would need at least a month to speak about. And this is, and Raz, and thank you Raz for this very kind introduction. One of the tolls that these attacks have taken is that it does not allow you to do the kind of research you want to do. So I'm, as everybody, many people know, I'm very much interested in kind of looking at the oral histories of people who organize. Back in the 80s, I was part of it, part of the organizing. This is how I met. Really, really important. Secondly, is very, very important for the movement. Third, is important how we learn history and what do we do about it, what sort of narratives we tell. However, my time is of course very constrained because we keep having attacks again after attacks after attacks. I also want to just mention that the people who are with me on the panel, maybe you don't know Nadia, but the Center for Constitutional Rights actually filed Freedom of Information Act on my behalf, which had allowed me to get my work authorization, my green card, and be able to go to school. Wow. We never received the files, never, okay? But we were able, and actually one of the people who intervened was one of us, come and speak for the Palestine Solidarity Committee at AMED. We need to be able to talk about it. We need to be able to actually pass it on. Also the things that we've done and the things that we've made mistakes about. I think it's really, really important because sometimes like for instance, I idealize 68. And you will hear it. I mean, I am critical, but I idealize it. And I think we all have these kind of blind spots. And of course, I'm very grateful to Jewish Voice for Peace, Adala, all the organizations who are involved here, PSC, my colleagues, the community we work, we're trying to work together, and so on, and everybody from the community here. I also want to just remind us that there are revolutions going on today, and I want to salute people of Lebanon. Woo! Amazing, millions of people are in this. Because if we don't, we become very demoralized, because the intent of the people who'd like to silence us and crush us is to make us demoralized. And I always say, when we actually started teaching Palestine, one of the main issues that we talked about are the narratives, the colonial narratives of submission, subjugation, and defeat versus narratives of resistance, resilience, and steadfastness. The colonists, and I'm not going to go about the history of Palestine, we can talk about that. We did the project because all of these anniversaries were coming up around Palestine, 50 years of 67 occupation, 100 years of Balfour, 70th anniversary of Nakba, etc., etc. And we use them in order for us to highlight some things that people don't talk about. For example, in the Palestinian movement, it's really, really important to speak about the blockade of Gaza. It was 10 years of the blockade of Gaza. The question of Sabra and Shatila. The question of all the communities that are not necessarily every single day in the news, because the New York Times, which is supposed to be the intellectual mouthpiece, does not feel it is necessary, and when they do, they misrepresent what's going on. But in that project, which I'm not going to talk about unless people want to have discussions around it afterwards, because I don't have time. But in that project, we really spoke about the question of how these narratives of submission, subjugation, and and I'm going to give you some of the examples from our own perspective, including some of the issues that have come up. I'm not going to talk a lot about San Francico State. I'll talk about it a little bit. But we have just come back from North Carolina, where I spoke at Duke University, at University of North Carolina, and at the National Lawyers Guild. And it's really amazing because we have all these movement lawyers, and the National Lawyers Guild, for people who don't know, was formed because the American Civil Liberties Union did not defend people against McCarthyism. And that's what the National Lawyers Guild came about, and still around is doing an amazing job, and people actually are going to be supported. And so were my two lawyers, who are amazing movement lawyers, who we defeated Lawfare. I mean, this is really huge. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But at North Carolina, there was the discussion in North Carolina itself, the discussion of the attack on the Middle East consortium between Duke and UNC. And the two other recent attacks that I'm actually paying a lot of attention. There's a lot of attacks that I just spoke about them. But there are the three attacks that I'm looking at a lot is the attack on the California Ethnic Studies curriculum. And the attack now, Stand With Us has sued UCLA over the lecture I gave on Islamophobia, which is very interesting. I'm not going to say too much about it because my lecture is online. I mean, the whole lecture is online. And I was actually harassed by the Zionist students Now the whole narrative has changed that I was harassing the Zionist students. And it's all online. Everything is available online. Palestine Legal actually has a whole thing about it. The CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations. There is all of this stuff is available, but that doesn't matter because the truth at the end doesn't matter. It matters how we tell the story and who gets to tell the story and who has space in public space to tell the story. This is really what's going on. So they keep lying and lying and lying and lying, and more and this advances. So I think it's really, really important for us to actually learn about all these histories and be able to pass it. That's number one. Secondly, I think it's really important for us to think about why is this happening and what's the context of this happening. Some people, my colleagues spoke about this on the board. Let me just add a couple of things. That I don't think we should be surprised that the US is doing what it's doing. The US is a settler colonial state. I mean, people think Israel, people sort of accept that Israel now is a settler colonial state, but somehow it's a bit hard, although now with white supremacy being so exposed, maybe people can think about it more. But this is a country that was built on the genocide of indigenous people, on kidnapping and enslaving African people, on the Exclusion Act, on building incarceration camps for the Japanese during Second World War, on the McCarthyism, on the counterintelligence program in the 60s. I mean, on and on and on and on. So it didn't start, I mean, for us, for Arab and Muslim community, it didn't start post 9/11, 2001. This has been going on, and I want to also mention the LA8 case, which I think you've mentioned it a bit, that it was actually some of our friends and some of our friends here who were targeted under the McCarthyism, the McCarran-Walter Act. And then it's very interesting because it speaks about how Palestine gets exceptionalized sometimes by some of our colleagues in the movement for justice that sort of talk about one justice for some, but not justice for everybody, which is the title for Noura's book. But they speak about the LA8, they were attacked, they were targeted, and Barney Franks changed the whole resolution, but put the PLO as the culprit in its place, kind of like removed communism, yeah, of course. Not surprising. But LA8 were targeted specifically exactly like what's going on today, and when I speak about the ethnic studies, we can actually like make it, and the UCLA. So LA8 were targeted because the Reagan administration had a serious crisis at the time. They were having serious crisis with targeting people who were in solidarity with Latin America, Central America in particular. There were 250,000 people from the US who went to Nicaragua, visited Nicaragua that time. And the Reagan administration wanted to pass the Iran-Contra affair, which we found out about it afterwards, wanted to support the death squads, the Contras, who were killing people left and right, everywhere, genociding people. And it wasn't enough. Israel was helping, so Sharon went to Guatemala to Palestinize the indigenous population. I mean, all of this stuff was going on, but it wasn't out. And so they had a crisis. They tried to target the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. And they had all these, remember? All these hearings and so on, they couldn't do it. So they thought that we will target the Palestinians because it's the weakest link in the movement. And if we target the Palestinians, and we will, then we can go and pass laws that apply to everybody. This is what's happening today too. And I think this is kind of like, it's really important. I'm really glad that you highlighted the whole question of what does it mean to have a Palestinian exception? There is and there isn't. There isn't because Palestine is part of justice. And we would be doing a disservice to the struggle for justice in for Palestine and to the struggle of everybody to actually separate them and say they're not the same. Oh, these people are only, Palestinian speakers are controversial, but speakers from Guatemala are not. Some people are palatable, but some people are not. I think that's really actually very detrimental to the movement. And this is how the McCarthyism works too, and this is how the tools of oppression divide and rule. They target some people, and then they make everybody scared from them. So a person becomes radioactive. You don't want to touch them. You want to be controversial like them, and so on. And then even when you think about controversial, what's controversial? Controversial is only the stuff that you're challenging the status quo. That's only when things are controversial. Everything is controversial to somebody. Everything. The question is how it is being tested and what kind of questions we're asking about it. So they targeted the LA8 in order actually to be able to pass, and some of the laws that they passed during the LA8 case were incorporated in Patriot Act 1 and Patriot Act 2, post 9/11/2001. So people can actually Jonathan Cole, who was one of the main lawyers and so on, he's at Georgetown, and he has tons of writing about that actually shows how an enemy alien gets constructed, which is the name of a film I would highly recommend, about by the Japanese director who did it on a Palestinian. This is also why BDS is really important to have Israel. Anybody gets affected because they're working with us, we feel so bad and we want to organize. This happen again and again and again. We don't have time, but we don't wake up and we find it. It's actually there all the time. And I think this is one of the, and this is exactly what also is happening with the California Ethnic Studies curriculum. So California came up with a model curriculum to demand ethnic studies of all students, high school kids. So by the time they graduate, they have to have ethnic studies. And within that, the people who were part of it were actually committed to the indivisibility of justice. So they have Arab American studies, they talk about BDS, they have hip hop by Palestinian hip hop artists and so on. And of course, the Zionists went crazy. And they organized so much against it that they actually now delayed the ethnic studies curriculum in California. It's being held back because of telling them this is the cost of supporting Palestine. This is the cost of you of actually being inclusive of Arabs and Muslims who are also part of the population. They're not outside of the population. So this is the way that they use it again and again and again. There is a lot of similarities among, and the reason they're doing it today is because the time is very opportune for them. If I were a Zionist or a white supremacist or an Islamophobe and so on, our man is in the White House. The administration, the Department of Education is led by Betty DeVos, who wants to scratch everything that is called public education. I mean, this is her project. We're not the only ones. We're part of it. And Kenneth Marcus, who founded the Brandeis Center, which is one of the Zionist organizations, is now supposedly the guardian of civil rights within the Department of Education. Now, what people don't remember and don't pay attention to, because the articles are always written in the paper in different places and then used, is that they actually pass many attacks on private public education. They're very clear about it. They pass attacks against LGBTQI communities. I mean, all of it is there, but you have to find where they are. The paper is very interesting. It's very strategically placed. The ads and the articles and everything. So anytime you have something about, let's say, anti-Arab racism or something, next to it you see something about anti-Semitism. Why if you talk about both of them are being part of racism, yes, because we only about ethnic communities. It's not about national communities, not about religious communities, it's about everything. It's always divide and conquer, because this is how the system stays in. And if we are serious about challenging it, we need to have a similar strategy. We need to have a comprehensive strategy. And I'm not talking about, some people used to always tell us in the 80s, you want to have 100,000 demands in a demonstration and so on. Whenever we said Palestine, they will come up with that. And we said, no, it's a perspective. But what kind of perspective you are talking about? And what kind of issues you're invisibilizing? And are you doing that intentionally to satisfy some donors, some collaboration, something of this sort? So this is another thing that I think is really important to keep in mind. The third thing I think is really important to keep in mind is that we are winning. And I agree with Nadia, we are winning. And I'm not being utopian about it, even though I'm very optimistic and I'm 64 years old, I'm still struggling and I will die struggling. But because but I really believe that we will actually win. We are winning. There has been 100 years at least of colonialism in Palestine. Has Israel been able to silence Palestine? It hasn't. Erasure, destruction of villages, all sorts of things you can think about. Everybody has read the history and so on. They haven't. Now they resort to actually nastier things, and the Israel lobby, the groups, the network of the groups that are supporting Israel, these right-wingers, nasty people, and so from Lawfare to Amcha to Stand With Us to Brandeis Center, what have you, and the Defamation League, they're all together. They have put massive resources and massive connections. They cannot. They are unable to silence the voices of justice. The United States has always been the space for the Zionist movement. But we even see today cracks in Congress. I mean, in Congress, whoever dreamed of that? There are cracks in Congress. There are incredible who are fighting day in and day out. I'm talking about also the Senate and so on, because now we are actually raising the cost also of people being for anti-justice, for injustice. So I think it's really important to keep thinking about that. And this is also affirms the point that when bullies bully and they fail, they become nastier. This is, I mean, every single time they get nastier and nastier and nastier. And this is exactly what's happening in my case. And I'm going to just say how much time I have. And I will, 5 minutes? Okay. So I mean, you can see all the things online. I actually want to show you. Let me say something, and then I want to show you just to end up with the interview by Brooklyn's team. So for us, ever since we started the program at San Francisco State in 2007, I was very excited because this is the place where the 1968 strike started. This is the longest student strike in the history by Black Student Union's Third World Liberation Front. We just finished marking the 50th anniversary. Jewish thinking and non-Jewish thinking about how do you confront anti-Semitism preceded Zionism. Historically, Zionism was not the first fireman or fire person on the ground. They weren't. Okay, there were a lot of people who were talking, and actually we also trace anti-Semitism before 1492 to Andalusia. We don't talk about only in Western Europe but that's kind of like in the Eurocentric mind, it sort of drops out. But that's when Muslims and Jews were both prosecuted by some people. Somebody going and getting lost, it's called West Indies for a reason, in order to exploit more and compete with other colonialisms, right, with the British colony. And that's when Muslims and Jews were forced to eat pork. They had to convert, conversos, they were kicked out of their homes and so on. This is what it's happened. So when the Zionists say, oh, it's been from time immemorial fighting between Muslims and Jews, like, go read some history. It's really, it helps a little bit. But this is kind of like this, that there has historically been anti-Zionist and Jewish responses to anti-Semitism, but it hasn't been as obvious as it was today. Today, Zionists are really trying, this is also part of their agenda, is they're really, really trying to hold on to the ownership of Jewishness. And they are very bothered when anybody says, including Jewish Voice for Peace in court, when we were in court, the judge, they said, oh, you know, she's talking about white privilege, and she's talking about, she is anti-Semitic and so on. So the judge turned to the lawyer of Lawfare and said, but who's Jewish Voice for Peace? And the lawyer pretended that JVP is a fake organization, like fake Jews, right? I mean, okay, say fake Jews, say fake Jews, anti-Semitic, and so on and so forth. So, but that is not, it's not possible anymore to silence that. It's not possible to silence not only in the older generations, also in the younger, because half of SJP members actually are Jewish. And it's not something kind of like, it's not to be used for utilitarian, opportunistic ways. It is the right thing to do, because Jewish people of conscience don't want Israel to speak in their name. I mean, and historically nobody owns Jewishness, Arabness, Muslimness. There is a diversity of all the communities anyway. And actually to say that all Jews think the same way and feel the same way, that's anti-Semitic. That's actually stereotyping as well. So that is a very major battle that we won because Judge Orrick, a federal judge, when he ruled and told Lawfare to go and bury themselves, dismissed with prejudice, really, 41 pages, amazing. It's actually a political treatise, it's not even a legal document. We can read it. And he said, just because she's anti-Zionist and supports Palestinian resistance does not make her anti-Semitic. That was huge. And they had come with almost 1,000 lawyer law firm. We had only 2 pro bono lawyers. The university did not even tell me. They had meetings without telling me. I heard from Campus Watch tweets about it. And I had to actually fight with the university to make sure they don't settle, because there is anti-Semitism at San Francisco State. I had a Nazi student in my class on Palestine last fall, and the university did not do anything about it. Neither did the Department of Jewish Studies, neither did SF Hillel, neither did Jewish Community Relations Council, who are constantly harassing us. But they did not, none. Myself, my Jewish colleagues, JVP, a new Jewish group called Jews Against Zionism, and all the historical student organizations from Palestinian to MECHA, to BSU, League of Filipino Students, Students for Quality Education, we all went and actually demanded that the university take care of it. But they didn't. They didn't. They canceled, they brought in the Nazi, and they canceled, and I actually I was going to show you the slides, but my computer got afflicted with a virus that has Hebrew on it, so. yeah. Anyway, but the university so the university is not dealing with this stuff, and they're not dealing with issues that are really serious and hateful and so on. They are only concerned about satisfying. Why is that? Because the university, and this is the last point I want to make, is the university today is becoming corporatized. The university is no longer funded by public funds. The university is funded the state and got us more faculty lines. We at San Francisco State have 5 more faculty lines than the university spend, and they're not being accountable to it, but we're trying to hold them accountable. So what they do is they depend on private donors. And private donors dictate whether you're talking about Zionists as they might be Jewish and Zionists, or Christian Zionists, the right wing, that they ally themselves with. So these are the ones who dictate the terms. So for example, when the Palestinian students and other students protested against the racist mayor of occupied Jerusalem near Barakat, the university singled out the Palestinian students, even though the protest was like about 50 students from all sorts of backgrounds, and said only the Palestinian students. And the Palestinian students said to them, why are you targeting us? Well, you think nobody else cares about the war criminal coming to campus? Everybody is bothered by Nazi, everybody is bothered. But the university has listened because they have a big donation from a corporate foundation called the Correct Foundation, which is a pro-Zionist foundation. And the Correct Foundation threatened the university and actually took the money away, I think $1.7 million. And now, one of the associate vice president of the university comes from the Correct Foundation. And the associate vice president, vice chair of the advancement, development, which oversees the College of Ethnic Studies, my own college, actually comes from Hadassah, from the Zionist organization.
My mom used to be.
So there is some kind of going to do, and we continue doing the delegation. There are people here from the U.S. prisoner and Solidarity delegation, Laura and Susie. In 2016, when they have escalated, we organized the Indigenous and Women of Color Fairness Delegation. 2011, we organized the Academic and Labor Delegation. We organized Teaching Palestine. So we continue doing this, and we also continue opening our classrooms to the community, because we do believe in the spirit of 68 that talks about decolonizing the curriculum. Having the experience of lived communities being validated, and actually having people from the communities teach and so on. Now, the university changed its mind because of all the Zionist pressure on it, and the right wing, and actually it's going right. And it's not being held accountable, it's not being transparent. We haven't changed our mind. We're sticking to the program. We agreed we're going to do this, we're building the program. And because the university has failed, we're suing them. I'm suing the university in a federal lawsuit. The good news is now the federal judge actually refused to dismiss the case. The university went to her and said, oh, please dismiss the case because Rabab Abdulhadi posted against Zionists are welcomed by the university president and so on, and that's a hateful message, which is very interesting, but you will see now from Blue Goldstein. One of the things that they mentioned is because I posted the big banner of Queers Against Israeli Apartheid on my Facebook, and it was faced. Now they keep calling it hateful message, but they don't say where it came from. They say, I say Zionism equals racism, and divest, boycott, divest, sanction, but they don't put that it's actually the Queers from Israeli apartheid. It's very bothering them, a lot. Right? So they've been trying to actually silence and say, and they keep saying that this is the reason, and actually now they're demanding criminal charges against me. People are going to respond about the labor violations, the multiple labor violations, that you have it. And I'm more than happy to show you pictures of my computer and the revocation of my travel to South Africa after I criticized the university provost for counting Israel Independence Day as a religious holiday for Jews and forgetting about Eid al-Fitr and Ramadan. Okay? I mean, this is like all of this stuff, there is retaliation and so on. We believe we will win. We believe we will win. And it has a heavy cost, but the reason I'm actually going forward with it is because I am very much encouraged. And honestly, I'm encouraged by everybody here in the room and everybody in the movement. Because every single time I feel like exhausted and I feel tired and I feel I have no time to breathe. The toll is really hard. I receive death threats. I mean, it doesn't stop. I go and I meet students who are so empowered. I meet colleagues who are so empowered. I meet members of the committee. I receive an email in Arabic from Palestine or Lebanon. I receive something from South Africa. People around the world are very supportive. And I'm senior. I'm a senior faculty member. I'm tenured. I'm standing up also so other people can actually also defy this silencing, defy this isolation, and stand up and say, no, we're not going to take it, and we are going to fight for what's just, what's right, for a better future for all of us. Thank you.
lawsuit over allegations of anti-Semitism on campus. Well, she's now suing the school.
Joining us now is attorney Brooke Goldstein, executive director of the Lawfare Project. Brooke, welcome to the show. Thank you for having me. So Brooke, break this down for me. Why is she actually the one? Now she posted this very controversial image to not only her own private account, but also the school's official Facebook account that many have labeled anti-Semitic, and somehow now she's the one suing the school?
Exactly. She was a named defendant in one of the lawsuits that the Lawfare Project brought on behalf of Jewish students and community members, suing San Francisco State University for Title VI violations, creating a hostile environment against Jewish students, also First Amendment violations, and of course Prof. Abdulhadi was at the center of this. This is a very radical professor at San Francisco State University who was tied to Hamas-dominated universities, who led a trip where she invited students to meet with members of a designated terrorist group, the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine. She routinely engages in harassment and discrimination against Jewish students, and she recently unlawfully posted on the Facebook page of SFSU a very racist line saying Zionism equals racism, attacking the ethnic and cultural identity of Jewish students. And she has now turned around in a typical frivolous lawsuit meant to intimidate the school and sued the school because they are trying to contain her attack on Jewish students.
I know I was recording.
I hope you noticed the racism of the optics there, in addition to the content, everything else. Lovely. We have only a little time for Q&A, I'm sorry, but we started late. So we do have time, and we invite your comments and questions. Jordan, yeah.
You talked about sanctions. Please tell me more. What's going on in those terms? Please.
Yes, that's a good idea. Any others? And remember Gabriel's question in the beginning. Yes. Yeah, what next after yes? Any other questions, comments? You're trying to absorb everything. There was a lot to absorb. Anybody else? Well, then let's just go with Ed, please.
And we have
Yeah. And also, if you would like to pose questions to each other, please feel free.
So in terms of sanctions, I'm not sure if everybody in this room has seen, but there's already been talks of leveraging the aid that we send over to Israel. It's pretty amazing that that's already in the discourse in these presidential debates, not the ones hosted on TV, but it's coming up in discussions. So that's a great entry point. We need to push our politicians, we need to push the candidates for president right now to commit to withholding aid. And the next step would be sanctions against weapons sales to Israel. But definitely, especially in this election, I think leveraging the aid element is going to be huge. And it's already being talked about, so why not?
And I would just add, it's not only being talked about, it's actually being legislated. So if you look at HR 2407, around Palestinian children, and that Betty McCollum from Minnesota has introduced a number of times, in fact, it is conditioning aid to Israel with regard to the treatment of Palestinian children. So actually, that's a sanctions bill, right? So we're conditioning aid with regard to human rights violations. So I would say that it's happening, it's in the discourse, it's in politics, and you're having a huge amount, particularly for advocacy on Palestine, of co-sponsors to the bill. So if there's energy and interest in your community to do work around this is a really interesting case study that I think is a super exciting moment. And then exactly like the Leahy law works. So there's different ways that we can intervene in Congress and using US mechanisms and US laws to hold Israel accountable already that I think people are interested in exploring, but just to note that 2407 is working.
Tell people what the Leahy Law is, because a lot of people don't know.
The Leahy Law is a mechanism to also condition U.S. aid if a foreign government is using that aid to commit gross human rights abuses with the funding, right? So there is a vetting mechanism that is supposed to be in place. It doesn't exactly exist for Israel. Or Egypt, actually, but what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to see, and the country that receives the aid is supposed to document how that funding is being used, and then if human rights defenders or others, impacted people can say, this funding and this military equipment or this unit was involved in gross human rights violations, then you can trigger the Leahy Law and allow the U.S. to suspend military aid to that country.
Can I respond to the solidarity question to Gabe?
Yeah, of course.
Raz, can I just, okay, I'm gonna respond. So I think BDS is really important, and I think it's a measure of what's going on, but I do think there are other things. So I would just say that's one thing, because you want to hold Israel accountable. You don't want Israel to get away with being exceptionalized from any other country. Just like every other country, simple as that. And now there are also charges of Israeli war crimes in many countries. So a lot of the Israeli war criminals can't actually travel. Like Libby's Sydney, she's going to Duke University, and the students have a petition. So please look it up and sign, okay, to support the students not to host her, because that's also part of the pressure on Duke to kind of comply because of what's happening with the Department of Education consortium. But she cannot go in many places. But on the other side also there are other things. So one of the things we've been doing is this collaboration with Palestinian universities, is the study abroad, which the university has been fighting tooth and nail, but we're going to do it in January. We're going anyway, we're calling it study abroad. And if they don't give the credit, the students come back and they can go to their professors and say, here's what we learned, and they can give them credit for it. It's been done all the time. We wanted the university to do it officially, so now we're hoping, because of the union and because the students are mobilizing and so on, we're hoping that the university will feel ashamed of itself and actually behave. And if they don't behave, we have the lawsuit. So, but I think there are multiple ways, because BDS is created, is launched in order to actually make sure that the Palestinians have a dignified life in justice and peace like everybody else. So you need to accomplish that in multiple ways. So you can pass a BDS law. At the same time, people really need to understand who is it that they're passing the BDS resolution about? What's happening to the Palestinian students? What's going on with the right to education and so on? Which is all of the stuff is like, a lot of people don't really know what's happening, and they think, and the Zionists presented in such a way that we're being frivolous, like she said here. Frame it that way, frame it in terms of justice and so on. BDS becomes one tool